في ربوع المجد كنا نرفع النصر المبين ونعيد الحق إن عبد رب العالمين.
I just wonder, like, is there a way to talk about it that isn't gonna like chafe against students' values or families' values, or is it really just like no discussion of this is okay?
I know I explain in every training, Islam it's a text-based religion. There's no getting away from that. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said that Allah has cursed the men who imitate the women and the women who imitate the men. And any talk like that, it falls under the ruling of that hadith as regarding its permissibility and its prohibition.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum, peace be upon all of you. What follows is a live consultancy call I recently did with an educator in an American public school district that is a diversity coordinator of sorts in that district, and who reached out to me looking for what they described as advice about how to talk to Muslim families and students about LGBT issues, as promoting safe schools for LGBT students is core to their job description. Both parties consented to have this call recorded. The recording of it is the property of Abraham Education, and both parties agreed that the call could be used for external educational purposes. I'm posting the full video here with the identity of the educator concealed. I'm posting this because I'm frequently asked by Muslim parents and community members about how to talk to people in education who want to put Muslim through educational programming around these issues. It's beneficial for people to see this done in an authentic context, as this video is about to show. Please refer educators to abrahameducation.com so they can register to take the training program Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, or buy them the book of it on Amazon, so we as a Muslim community can start setting the agenda ourselves for how our youth are educated and treated within the public school system. Also, please take a moment to press the like button, share the video with others, and if you are confronted with this issue with your child's school or school district, you can consider sharing this video with them, as it would be a good way for you to give them a constructive understanding of our viewpoint on these issues as Muslims. And if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, as I will be doing a follow-up to this where I will break down this conversation in order to teach Muslims how they can be successful in these types of interactions with non-Muslims and in advocating for our children within the public school system.
Hey, Mr. Abraham, how you doing?
How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for meeting with me today. Sorry, I'm kind of dark.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for reaching out to me.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. I took your training when I was in the classroom last year, found it super useful. Really appreciate just all the time and energy you put into helping folks increase their knowledge.
Did you do it online?
I did do it online, yeah.
Was it the self-paced one or a live one?
It was live.
Okay. Last year? Was it last school year or last calendar year?
Last school year, so I think in the spring,
Yeah, it was probably
winter or
March.
spring.
Probably March.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Just a little bit of background. I transitioned out of the classroom this year, and I'm doing LGBTQ support stuff for public schools. And so it looks like I do a lot of staff training. I support like student groups, planning events, stuff like that. And one thing that I think came up a bit with the person who held this position before me is they didn't have a lot of background working with Muslim families who might have concerns about like how these topics are being presented in the classroom, or like concerns about facilities and all of that. So any light you're willing to shed on like how we might like discuss these issues with Muslim families, or like find common ground. Yeah, whatever you think might be helpful for me to know.
Well, I mean, I think I mentioned it to you in my reply, like, did the previous person, did they have specific like friction in talking to Muslim families? And have you spoken to Muslim families about this?
I haven't spoken to Muslim families about this. I've certainly had Muslim students in my classes when I've taught about some of these topics in the past. And I could definitely sense like some discomfort going on. Students were very respectful, but like I could tell like there's some tension here that I want to learn more about.
Sure.
And I know that in the past, there's been a group of Somali parents who have expressed concerns about like our sex ed curriculum, and specifically like talking about transgender identity as being something that's a concern for them.
Right.
So that's kind of all the background that I have. And I've worked with Muslim families like around other stuff, like just from being a teacher, but never explicitly like around these issues.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like I said in my reply to you, this is the number one issue that Muslim families talk to me about.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have to be honest, if I have to express something, people sometimes ask, what's the number one thing Muslim families are concerned about regarding public schools? It is this exactly. Now, from my training, I talk about a lot of different things. There is things that I see as bigger issues, and some things are, more prescient that need to be addressed as well with Muslim kids and serving them correctly. But I can't help people's perceptions about things. And I think, actually there, especially, I shouldn't say especially with Somalis, just with Muslims in general, there's a fairly long history. The Somali community, their diaspora is very, very well connected. They have family members all over the place. They're on messaging groups together, social media, they're very constantly connected. I recall 15 years ago, it was about 15 years ago, a school in Minneapolis, they brought a outside organization in, this is a teacher's individual action, to teach to kids and read stories that featured, like parents, like two moms in the books and this type of thing. And most of that class, I believe, was Somali kids. I mean, the school, that school has gotten over the backlash of that, and they do still have like a large number of Somali kids. But at that time, there was a huge amount of families who fled that school.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that, but just going back then, and charter schools are something that are new in Washington because they weren't legal before 2017. But they are something that are growing. They're something that was going to grow. Here in the Twin Cities, we've always had them since the early 90s. We have over 20 just in the Twin Cities that are almost 100% Somali kids. And there's a few touch point issues that families really found they had a hard time getting a grip on with the district schools. I mentioned some of my training, music class is a big thing. Those things like birthday and holiday celebrations were big things, but this is a big issue as well. And it's really not just recent, but going back a while, like around here, the perception that if you send your kid to Minneapolis public schools, they're going to be exposed to stuff. They're going to learn about this stuff. If you send them to charter school, to be protective. It's a big thing that's driven the enrollment of students in those places. So, this is just all stuff in servicing public schools you have to be aware of. You have to be aware of it and not handling it right. It risks the possibility of driving families away from the school district. With sex ed, I and I don't know if you know Sarah, who is the parent volunteer coordinator at middle school. She's someone who I talk with frequently, and she's been involved in public school for 30 years. She's had like 5 kids graduate from there. She's a big supporter of the district and all this stuff. But even before this law was passed about sex ed in the state of Washington, she reached out to me to ask about it and what can families do about it. I know from that law, it explicitly states that families have a right to opt out of sex ed program.
They do.
So for me, the culturally relevant thing to do for Muslim families, and these are disempowered families who have mostly been through the refugee process, that they have very little feeling of ownership over the kids' education, this type of stuff. They're unprivileged in that way. The right thing to do for them would be to make the process of opting their kid out easier. If they want that, if they've expressed that to the person previously. I did look at the language of the law. It seems to say specifically that they have to put it in writing to the school board, which I don't like that, because that discriminates against people who don't read and write well, or they don't read and write in the English language well. So the best thing to do would be to give them assistance with that. And, look, I think that if you do that and you make that readily available, and as you said, your kids were respectful when you talked about in the classroom. And on the whole, of course, Muslims, our religion teaches good manners. Bullying is not acceptable. And any kid who bullies, they should, there should be consequences for that. So, but the thing is, like, when anxiety gets ramped up in the community, then anxiety gets ramped up in the kids. And then it's like, if something comes up, usually kids feel shut in about it, and they're not going to advocate for their viewpoint or anything. But there will be some kids who will be jumpy about it. You get what I'm saying? If the anxiety is ramped up. So I think that if you can create a process that makes it easy for families to opt out, let them know explicitly through translation, through proper channels of communication that are going to reach them, to let them know that if you want this for your kid, we're aware that might be a need. We're willing to accommodate that. I think families will appreciate that. And that and that will ease the tension that a lot of kids will have. And that'll make it less likely that anyone suffers bullying from kids.
I appreciate that. Thanks. I think one of the things that I noticed, like, so I was not, when I was teaching, I wasn't a sex ed teacher. I taught humanities. And so sometimes there would be like something that would come up around like gender or sexuality. Like we would read something by like a queer person or something like that. And I would mention that as part of their identity, right? And sometimes I would see like my students were cool. Like I didn't have problems. But I would notice definitely like sometimes increased disengagement students do when they're not, that kind of bothers them. They're not going to make a big deal out of it, but it's kind of like shuts down. And I worry a little bit that like, I just wonder, like, is there a way to talk about it that isn't gonna like chafe against students' values or families' values, or is it really just like no discussion of this is okay?
Well, I mean, I know I explain in every training, Islam it's a text-based religion. There's no getting away from that. There's no organization, there's no church count, there's nothing like the Catholic Church or anything. There's no organization of people who can change what Islam says and what it does not say. And what it says about all these issues are very clear. I sometimes mention when I'm talking about the book The Breadwinner. I don't know if you know that book, but that is a book about a girl in Taliban rule Afghanistan where her father, and there's all, and I talk about this as an example of a poor piece of literature that a lot of schools try to use to be culturally relevant to Muslims, but totally misses the mark. So this girl in the story, her father gets arrested, and of course the women are just locked in. So they make the decision that she is going to dress up as a boy and go to the market to sell stuff to earn a living for the family. So it's called The Breadwinner. Now, it's not written by a Muslim person. It's written by a Canadian woman who worked in Afghanistan, the Peace Corps or something like that. It's really obvious when you read the book that's not written by a Muslim woman. And something that's really obvious about it is the fact that they come up with this idea to have the girl dress up as a boy, and it causes no moral quandary whatsoever. That would pretty much never happen. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said that Allah has cursed the men who imitate the women and the women who imitate the men. And any talk like that, it falls under the ruling of that hadith as regarding its permissibility and its prohibition. And it's a very strong language. And the story of the prophet Lot, who we call Lut in Arabic, who preached to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and God turned their city upside down for the men practicing their lust on men. That story is told explicitly in the Quran. And there's nothing or no one or anyone that's going to change that. And people know that story. These kids memorize that book in the weekend. There really is no changing it. Now, people have rights to privacy in Islam. So homosexuality is highly criminalized in the Muslim world and the better part of Africa for the most part. Now, it's, in under Islamic law, if two people do that in their privacy of their own home and someone spies on them, that witness testimony is not accepted because it's spying. So it more or less has to be done really out in the open. Privacy is really valued in Islamic culture. And a lot of times, a lot of the biggest feedback I get from Muslim parents when I talk about this is it's just like why do we even have to talk about sex at school? It's a private thing. Let us talk about it. So it crosses those taboos. So, I don't really know what to say. And especially with the feedback that I get from Muslim families, I can't authentically represent them and honestly say trying to find some sort of common ground approach is the way to go. We can talk about being respectful to people. We can talk about having good manners. That is stuff that, of course, Islam supports and encourages. Kindness to neighbors, Your neighbor has rights upon you in Islam, no matter who they are. And honestly, this type of stuff is talked about in mosques in America right now regarding these issues and this type of thing. And I honestly, I feel like, we have a very active and influential LGBT population here in the Twin Cities. And then we have a very high Somali population, a very high Muslim population. We've put a lot of effort into being good neighbors and showing that we're not trying to hurt anybody. We're not trying to do anything and getting along, and I understand that the LGBT community in America is traumatized by the Christian right and like the Westboro Baptist Church and these organizations. I understand that there's that trauma in there, but it's not fair for us to have that projected onto us because we're traumatized by those same people, So, there's that type of thing. And again, it's a really big thing ramping up anxiety. And, look, with these Somali families, especially, if they are low socioeconomic status, increasingly it's the case with the parents of these kids that they are parents often themselves were in refugee camps at a young age. The parents who are of the generation we have now. And they grew up in a refugee camp. So that a lot of them have very destitute backgrounds. And, and some other Muslims I know in education tried to talk to elders in the Somali community about these issues, trying to explain to them that someone who's biologically male wants to use feminine pronouns or this type of stuff. They honestly cannot even grasp it. They can't even grasp what is being talked about. So, it's just like the depth of anxiety that this type of things can cause. It's just very, very real to people, Yeah. So, I think that, making explicit and again, facilitating people's desire to opt their kids out is the first thing to talk about. Now, the question of a humanities class or these, and I found this too, that, language arts classes and things are the other area where this stuff gets into because any type of social issue can get brought up in them.
Yeah, of course.
This is a whole other thing that I've been asked with families about whether or not they have the right to pre-stipulate to schools that if that type of thing is going to happen, they want their kid drawn out about. And I've consulted with some law agencies. And the best answer that I can get right now is that's not something that is totally drawn out in U.S. court case law. And it differs somewhat depending on the district, the appellate court district that you're in the United States. So that's not something we exactly know, to be honest. I will say the current Supreme Court that we have, they're heavily in favor of parents' rights. And they already have some rulings that have favored not only parents' rights, but parents' religious rights regarding the education system. So I think the districts with Muslim families in particular, they need to be sensitive about this. They need to understand that these are overall disempowered families. And, we've had this huge demographic change in the United States over the past 20 years. Even a district like public schools was more white in the 90s and 80s than it is now. Like the rest of the student population. When it was that way, the families had a lot of ownership over what the school system said. And there wasn't No Child Left Behind and the Common Core standards and these more national federal type programs trying to control schools at the local level. So local people could have more influence over their community school. Now we've had the demographics change. We've had all these immigrant families come in, and all of a sudden, now that power is gone from families. And immigrant families in general, a huge thing that drives paranoia too, certainly in the Muslim world, but the better part of the developing world, education is very top down. So, the Muslim world, you have the Ministry of Education. They create books for each subject area. They give those books to the schools. School teachers are expected to teach those books A to Z. So the general perception that a lot of Muslim families have of the education system is it's not something they can influence, but rather it's something they're subject to. And a lot of times that is taken advantage of by people because they're not given the influence that they want, that they would like to have. That can create a misperception with this issue because sometimes when families see something on social media or they see something on the news or something that's saying this or that was done in the classroom, they might think that's happening everywhere when maybe it's not, or that type of thing. So that might be something to talk out with families, like the actual extent to which this education is happening. But just transparency is good, and I ask, I appreciate you reaching out to me. I really do, because when parents feel like something backhanded happened, or they feel like something was done behind their backs, that is what really triggers some things. So I appreciate you being proactive and reaching out.
Yeah.
And what I ask is to please make it so that they can have that right that they have, that the state legislature gave them to opt out, that that can become exercisable for them.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I really appreciate that. I feel like this issue, it's like, it sucks because we're talking about two vulnerable populations, right? In different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it becomes, at least for, I feel like a lot of the folks, to be completely honest with you, that I work with at the district, which is a lot of white folks, have this kind of misconception that I don't know that they are seeing Muslim families in their full humanity with this issue. And I would really like to be able to move forward in a way where folks just feel respected and they feel heard, even if some of these conversations are difficult. So I just really appreciate your time, helping me think through some of this stuff. And I know it's not an easy answer that's going to be solved tomorrow, but I just appreciate you giving me some things to think about in building my context for how to move forward.
Thanks. I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate that you did the training. If you have people you work with who you'd like to understand Muslim students and families better, please refer them to my program.
Yeah.
I'm doing a shorter version of it now to make it more accessible to people. And then I give them a discount opportunity to the more extended one. But I'm trying to make it so I always have online offerings available. So please refer them to Abraham Education or to get the book. So they can do that learning.
Awesome. I absolutely will. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.